All right, good morning, everybody. Looks like we're up, and sorry about yesterday. I still don't quite know what happened, but I know what I did to finally fix it. I figured out my own solution rather than the technical support that offered to help me. And I can see already that some of the stuff already isn't working, but hopefully you can hear me and see me. And I'm going to do something new today. I'm going to have a guest on at the end. Actually, I think I've done that long ago in the past. It's kind of hard to juggle all these things, but I was talking with today's guest, Cambron Wright. If you don't know who he is, he writes at Substack at Wright Writes, and I'll let him talk about that whenever he comes on in a bit. But I realized a lot of what I'm passionate about doing here, like, yes, I want this to be a viable ministry that takes care of itself, but I'm also wanting to do my part to facilitate Methodist identity in that's what's needed in the present moment. You know, everybody knows I'm a big Methodist, and it's one thing to say, hey, we need to reclaim this. It's another thing to post a bunch of academic articles. It's another thing just to kind of day in, day out, model it, invite other people into it. And so that's kind of the intent here. I'm realizing, what am I trying to do here? I'm trying to show how this religious tradition is not only viable, but desirable for the present moment. And so I'm going to talk to other Methodists. I've already reached out to several different pastors in my own annual conference. My hope is that almost every day I'll have a 30 to 45-minute conversation with other very conscientious people trying to make this thing real to them. And Cambron is a great person to start off with. And so I hope you stick with me as I'm going to go through, I think I can do 3 topics in 30 minutes, and then he and I can talk, and we'll go to locals. And my hope is that over time, everybody wants to be a part of my locals community so that we can come around different guests and encourage them and learn from them. The hope is that this becomes eminently useful to the people called Methodist, especially my tribe, the Global Methodist. But I hope Congregational Methodist, Free Methodist, Wesleyan, Salvationists, I hope all of them eventually see that there was once this dream called Methodism that could still be real and alive today. So anyway, we're going to go forward, and I'm going to remind you, I'm just one guy in a rural area with an unstable internet connection, sort of. So if I clip out, just reload 5 minutes later, usually I'll be able to get back up and going. So yesterday was an exceptional situation. But anyway, I was just reading over this morning's headlines, and it's a bunch of voting stuff, and I don't really want to spread that anxiety. I want to talk about, the New York Times, they send me a daily mailing, and the main article was about marijuana legalization and how the American public, actually, I think I can show you this graph probably. The American public has swayed widely in favor of legalization of marijuana. Yeah, let me bring up this graph here for you, because it's, I kind of can't believe it. 70% in 2023 are okay with legalizing marijuana. Now, is marijuana like a huge, terrible drug? Well, do y'all know what the worst, most damaging drug in America is? It's actually alcohol. And we tried to outlaw that in Prohibition, and it went terribly. That's actually very much intertwined with Methodist history. It's a huge failure on our part, because when you try and legislate morality, sometimes it goes wrong. But also, the current conversation is around Christian nationalism, and a lot of people saying, you can't legislate your morality on us. But the rejoinder that I think is true is all laws are undergirded by morality. There is no law without a moral implication. And so what morality are we going to choose? And are we going to have a populace that we're okay with being highly sedated or under the influence of chemicals? And that's what we've already got, whether we're talking about marijuana or alcohol or anti-anxiety or anti-depressant. There's a lot of behavior modification going on a chemical level, and it's hard to imagine things going back. So, with marijuana, it just smells bad, and I don't notice it making people particularly productive or social. I see people getting more antisocial, and I know everybody says that marijuana helps you get over this anxiety and stuff. I'm just not noticing that. I'm noticing that people are getting worse as they lean more on. Here's here's what I'm going to offer in a nutshell is that the only way for humans to flourish is to do what's in the Bible and make yourself do it till you want to do it. And in the Bible, we're not told to smoke a certain substance or drink a certain substance in order to, I mean, we're told to eat and drink the body and blood of Christ, but that's not for behavior modification. That's for conforming to the image of Christ. The main thing is, like, we're given spiritual disciplines to do. Those are the things that transform us, and we keep, as a society, wanting a quicker, easier fix. And that's not to say that a shortcut is never acceptable. Maybe sometimes it is, but it seems to me that our society as a whole would do well to reclaim spiritual disciplines rather than keep looking for something that they can quickly ingest or inhale that will change them. It's a Band-Aid for a bullet wound, you know? So speaking of Band-Aids for bullet wounds, actually it's kind of the opposite. I realize that the stuff that's going to get the most clicks is probably the anti-United Methodist stuff. That's why a lot of people like me. And I'm going to continue to do that stuff insofar as the UMC deserves it. But also I want to build up, and I realized I had too many topics stacked up that were, inflaming tensions, and I didn't want to do that. So I'm going to do something that we all agree on and talk about hymnals. And I'm being a little bit facetious there. But there was an article written. I still haven't read it. I wanted to read the first few bits and talk about the hymnal. This is written by Kelsey Kramer McGinnis. This is on Christianity Today. And the undergirding headline is, what is that called? Byline. Evangelicals seeking permanence and rootedness are reclaiming the practice of singing out of books. So I want to greet those who are with us on the live stream this morning. We got Jennifer. Let's see. Let me make sure that social stream is showing up. It is not. So here we go. We got Jennifer. We got Duncan. We got Gabe. My friend Jeff. Good morning, everyone. I've been busy, but trying to hop in and out. Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe. Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Pat. Jennifer. Gabe. Tim. Ben. D. All my friends. Hey, Earl. D. Yeah, there have been interesting studies showing marijuana being really good for deep brain recovery, neurological symptoms. That's interesting. That's the only thing that interests me. And I think hemp is actually probably really good for making a lot of materials rather than synthetic plastics, but that's a whole other thing. Hey, Tyson. Hey, Karen. Hey, Jonathan. Yes, people are afraid of cancel culture. And that's what I think, I've had some people, since I started broadcasting more this week, I've had some people gunning for me, and one person hurt my feelings. And one person wrote me and said, I don't know how you do what you do. And I've noticed, there are a lot of people who have opinions on this stuff, but a lot of things that they're not going to say it publicly. They're not going to say it online. They're not going to say it on video. And I'm one of these where it's just I refuse to be afraid and cowed. So one of the things that's happened more is I've gotten more of a reputation. I've invited a lot of people to interviews. Once upon a time, nobody said no to an interview with me, but more people have been saying no to me, and I think that's because there's been kind of a stink put on me. There are several people that, and it's not anything substantial, but I was talking to, I became aware that there was a group of people talking about me a couple weeks ago, so I just sent them all a message saying, hey, if you have concerns about me, just reach out to me and we'll figure it out. And none of them reached out to me, but a couple of them wrote things to the effect of, well, I am concerned, but, I'll talk to you about it later. And I just think this is what people in modern cancel culture do. I'm connecting it to Jonathan Russo's critique here, that we're afraid of cancel culture and the way that cancellation works. Sometimes it's vitriolic and angry and public, but a lot of times it's just people murmuring and muttering about you and just, I don't know about that guy. He seems to have other motives. Did you notice he makes money off of this? Did you notice, he uses this for selfish purposes? There's a way that people are very cruel to each other. And so the thing I noticed is white Anglo-American people in this culture, awash in this culture, are increasingly reluctant to talk to me for one reason or another. But immigrants from Africa, the Philippines, Asia, they are happy to talk to me. So in the coming weeks, I've got several people slated that are not American native. They're immigrant, and they're happy to talk to me. And you know what? I'm happy to talk to them. So we're hopefully going to have an immigrant-heavy show. There are lots of people from other parts of the world serving in the GMC in America, and so I'm excited to talk to them. Also, I'm hoping to do this like every weekday and have a different person every day. So if you know of anybody who would be really great for me to talk to for 30 or 45 minutes, then you can refer them to me at plainspokenpod@gmail.com. And we'll set it up, man. But I'm ready to learn from other people, encourage other people, pray over other people. I think it's going to be great. All right, let's look at our article for today. All right, so we're not going to read the whole thing. We'll just read some and respond to it. Oh, and I need to get this comment off of here, don't I? Before the service starts on Sunday morning at San Diego Reformed Church, the building fills with the sound of singing. Sean Kennelly, an associate pastor, leads a 45-minute psalm sing so the congregation can practice reading music together and using printed hymnals. We're seeking to add more and more hymns. It's a more robust form of worship, Kennelly said. There has been incalculable growth in the singing at our church. San Diego Reformed is in the process of shifting its worship towards hymnal-aided congregational singing. The congregation is part of what appears to be a growing number of churches working to recover the practice, never entirely lost, but not as popular as it used to be, of singing from books. Hymnals offer perceived permanence and stability in a musical landscape that changes quickly and often. The decision to reintroduce congregations to hymnals is often an ideological one, especially for churches that made the transition away from them in recent decades. But a notable number of churches are making that choice, choosing the printed page over lyrics projected onto a screen. Dan Creeder, a composer, arranger, and music minister who designed the Sing hymnal, which Crossway is releasing in fall of 2025, said hymnals aren't going to replace projection or any of the tech tools that undergird contemporary worship music, but they offer something valuable and different. If you're in a church that just goes with the most popular songs, where's your sense of permanence? Think of the kids growing up in your church. Where is their sense of permanence? What songs are they going to remember as they sing as they age? The hymnal slows us down, Creeder said. Hymnals have often served to connect Christians to specific traditions. Lutherans form a liturgical link with Martin Luther singing, "A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing," while Wesleyans recall the spirituality of the first Methodists with "Arise, my soul, arise." I did read this paragraph beforehand. I did not read the whole article, but I was embarrassed. I didn't know this hymn, so I looked it up at Hymnary. If you don't know about hymnary.org, it's a great resource for looking up hymns. And apparently it was sung to the tune, okay, so the words are down here, and it's sung to the tune Lennox, which I forget. Here, I'm just going to play it real quick. Oh, yeah, the Year of Jubilee. So it would sound like this. I don't know how many of you know this hymn. Arise, my soul, arise, shake off thy guilty fears, the bleeding sacrifice in my behalf appears. Before the throne my surety stands, before the throne my surety stands, my name is written on his hands. I can say confidently, I've never sung that hymn before, but the Wesley hymns are great. So anyway, I don't know what Wesleyan community this author was connected to, but mine don't sing that. Maybe we should. Where were we? Let's see. We were down here. Many denominations still print and distribute hymnals to help congregations shape their worship according to doctrinal and traditional distinctives. Some denominations have recently renewed efforts to strengthen people's sense of musical connection. So the link to that hymnal, not that article, is found in the show notes wherever you're watching it. It should be everywhere. You can read the rest of that on your own. But some history that might be important to know. Christians in the beginning were mostly illiterate. For at least 1,000 years, Christians did not have hymnals. Really, for at least 1,500 years, hymnals were not a thing. We had the Psalter in the Bible, and that was the original hymnal. And originally, Christians only sang that. After a bit, they sang other parts of Scripture and expanded upon it, like the Benedictus Dominus Deus, which my morning worship crew sings every morning, or the Gloria in Excelsis Deo. And then eventually, only after about 1,500 years, did we start writing other hymns that were usually quite closely reflecting what's in the biblical text, but not explicitly from the biblical text. But early Christians were very married to the Bible, and they wanted to sing that, and that's where chant came from. They didn't use instruments. They didn't have notated music. How would they learn it then? By memorization. They memorized the Psalter, they memorized the Scriptures and different praise hymns in Greek and Latin, and then in other languages as they worshiped. So the hymnal is kind of a new invention. The early hymnals that I've seen, very small print in these tiny little books, and they didn't have musical notation. It was just to hold on to the words, and then the tune was always a vehicle for the words. So modern hymnals that we've got with the notation, the music notes with the words married together, that's only been the last couple hundred years. Most church communities haven't even had the instruments to do it. It's all been a cappella anyway. If you don't remember, a cappella means like they do in the chapel. Instruments weren't allowed in Christian worship until just a few hundred years ago. We've changed a lot with how we do music. The current environment that is being corrected by going back to hymnals, which is addressed in this article, is it's based on a music industry that has never existed before a few decades ago. Now there are big music industries that make a lot of money off of churches paying for copyright rights to sing their music. So Bethel and Hillsong, of course, are highly successful modern churches that compose their own music. But they're not the only ones. Keith and Kristen Getty are an attempt to make decent hymnody that is also done kind of in a modern way. But hymnals are a way of trying to put in stone something that in many churches feels much more ephemeral. So every year we'll have its hits. It's starting in the 90s, Jars of Clay, and going back, I guess, to the Jesus movement in the 1970s. There were different songs associated with different eras. And that's kind of theologically problematic because we're trying to tap into something eternal. And whenever you're singing songs that are very much married to the spirit of the age, then your worship is going to be taking something eternal but stylizing it in something very ephemeral. A lot of people don't find a problem with that, but the thing is, when you have changing styles, what is it that you're marrying your identity in Christ to? A lot of people marry it to the spirit of the age, thinking that they're marrying it to Christ, but then the style changes, and then they're going, well, I don't like this new style. And so you have a lot of people saying, I am only going to worship if you worship in the style that I learned 30, 40, 50 years ago. A lot of other people saying, I'm only going to worship if it's new. And so it's this is one of many things that's pulling the church apart. We did not have this problem prior to, 150 years ago, whenever the Christian music industry and copyright law started really taking over and dictating how churches could do stuff. And so this return to hymnals, at least it has something tactile. It has something physical that doesn't change as soon as the guy running the projection hits a button. And so that's a step in the right direction. But even so, we keep producing these new hymnals with new music. And there might be something to be said for just looking through old hymnals and reclaiming old hymnals. And there's so much good, like, public domain music with great hymnody. I don't hear many people talking about this, but once my kids get a little more musically adept, I've talked to my wife about producing our own public domain hymnal. And I saw somebody else recently produced a public domain Methodist hymnal. And I think that that's really great. So I know there are a lot of church musicians who say, oh, you're going to deprive us of our livelihood. And I've just never been very concerned about that. I don't know. For a long time, church musicians from the beginning produced music for free. And I think, it's good to do that. And then if you're good at what you do, people find ways to pay you to do it. So anyway, I love hymnals, except for the really bad. I don't know. Even the 1989 United Methodist hymnal has some excellent hymns in it, and then it has some real trash in it. But I think hymnals are really great, and you can sit down and you can just read through them, and they can be so encouraging in your faith. And so I really love this idea of reclaiming hymnals, and I hope it goes that way. I think it's really good to contain doctrinal teachings in musical form. I've gotten a lot out of it. We only have time for me to cover one more topic. Doggone it. I'm enjoying talking too much this morning. That's a problem, isn't it? I need to turn to what's happened in the Baltimore-Washington conference, because I've covered this conference a couple of times before. It's got Bishop Easterling, very gifted, very progressive liberal, former lawyer, very powerful speaker, Easterling. I went through their annual conference last year and showed some of the dysfunction there. She and her conference trustees made it almost impossible to disaffiliate from the Baltimore-Washington conference. They put a policy in place that is very expensive. According to, I don't want to misspeak, but I was talking with somebody in her conference the other day, said one church had to pay $4 million to get out. Can you imagine? They only had 24 disaffiliations, and they amounted to $10 million to get out. So there are a lot of churches that just couldn't afford that. 37 of them decided to file suit with the National Center for Life and Liberty. Last year, that suit's been ongoing. Original signs were promising that they might prevail. The conference failed to file some paperwork on time and were publicly corrected for it. But then, as you'll see in the headline here, Maryland judge rules against 37 churches suing the UMC over a property dispute. Here's what it says. A Maryland judge, this is a name worth knowing, Michael Grabowski. He writes about a lot of mainline denominational fallout stuff. So he's really fair so far as I'm concerned. He writes, a Maryland judge has ruled against 37 churches that sued a regional body of the UMC, claiming that the rules for allowing them to depart the denomination were unfair. Judge Michael Malone of the Circuit Court for Anne Arundel County issued an order and opinion last Friday siding with the UMC Baltimore-Washington Conference in the disaffiliation process dispute. Malone upheld the conference's claim that the denomination had, quote, an irrevocable trust, end quote, over the properties of the UMC, including the church buildings belonging to the congregation seeking disaffiliation. Quote, Maryland law provides that trust is presumed irrevocable unless the power to revoke has been reserved, wrote Malone. Quote, and there is no language in the trust clauses in the discipline reserving the right to revoke. Thus, the trust it created is irrevocable, end quote. So you find this in different legal settings. Hypothetically, such a right exists. However, it hasn't been designed, so it doesn't exist. You found this in the United Methodist Church when disaffiliation was approaching, and they were thinking, well, we have the right as an annual conference to disaffiliate from the UMC. And what do you know? They did have the right, but they never designed a process for it. So actually, even though they had the right, they couldn't do it. So similarly here, you can have a trust and you can revoke a trust, but because the Book of Discipline doesn't provide for how to revoke that trust, it's irrevocable. Quote, defendants in this case were entitled to summary judgment on this claim as the local churches consented to the authority of the denomination, and the local church properties are merely held by the churches in trust for the UMC. Bishop Latrell Miller Easterling, head of the Baltimore-Washington Conference, said in a statement emailed to the Christian Post that she was, quote, grateful to have this matter resolved, end quote. With such critical needs facing our communities as food insecurity, addiction recovery, access to affordable health care, etc. Our focus should be on mission and ministry. It is my prayer that everyone will turn their attention to these Christ-centered needs. So the inference being there, concerns about the purity of the church or the liberty of believers to follow their conscience, those are really not important at all. Who cares about the purity of the church? We just need to be concerned about, doing good works as we understand them. The bishop also said she believed it was, quote, important to note that this decision rightly upholds the trust clause and the agency of annual conference trustees. Regarding the decision, one of the plaintiffs in the case, who asked to remain anonymous, emailed a statement expressing disappointment with the order and accusing the conference of, quote, financial malfeasance, greed, and unjust harm toward the local congregations, end quote. Quote, most of, if not all, the local congregations in this case have never received any financial support from the conference and have built and maintained their properties from the sacrificial giving of their congregants, he stated. And yet the conference chooses to act akin to Pharaoh in the book of Exodus and the scribes whom Christ himself describes in Luke chapter 20. While this decision from Judge Malone, who himself is a United Methodist layperson and opted not to recuse himself from the case, is a bit of a momentum killer, we will consult our legal counsel to discern what our next steps might be. So it remains to be seen if they are going to allow for, if they're going to appeal the case and try to do it again, or if they're going to try a different tack. Of course, one of the things that I've recommended is I just think it's theologically really hard. And I've had Dan Dalton write me and say, this is bad legal advice. I'm not giving legal advice, in my opinion. I'm giving theological advice. I just think it's bad to file against people in court. I think it's better to put them in a position to file against you. It seems to be working well in Rio, Texas, although the Rio, Texas conference has appealed, and we'll see. It could get undone there. But it seems to me that it would be interesting, at least, if you've already got this money in this church you're going to lose, then you can spend it. You can either walk away from it, which I think would be a travesty, or you can file legally against a party, and I don't like that very much, or you can just leave and do your own thing and put them in the position to file against you and then exhaust your funds fighting them in court. That makes sense to me. A defensive position makes much more sense to me. But also for people who just want to get up and go and leave, yes, there's abundant amount of scripture just saying, why not rather be wronged? Why not rather be defrauded? And if that's how they want to be, then let them be that way. I am not going to shame you. It's not, you have this money, you should go to war with it. You have your war chest. That's a worldly way of thinking. And I'm not going to shame other people who think that way and want to defend the legacy entrusted to them. I just, all the way along, I've frustrated a lot of people. I haven't taken a side on this because I think there's wonderful, faithful people who have chosen different tacks. So I don't know what they're going to do. I'm not going to pretend to have any insider information. I know that they've let at least one church go that was black after disaffiliation ended, but they had to pay out the nose for it, and there was a huge, long procedure. And I know there are at least 4 black churches that wanted out and have been denied. So I'm going to be talking to, hopefully, the leadership there and see if any of them want to talk to me. I got Cambron already waiting on me, but I wanted to share, this is Kevin Watson's Doctrine, Spirit, and Discipline. And there's some interesting history pertaining to disaffiliation. I think Cambron will be interested in this waiting online. It deals with Richard Allen and the Mother Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church. Here's a picture of that church right here. It's not focusing. Focus. It's not going to do it for you. I don't know why. So the beginnings of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, Watson writes, are interwoven with Richard Allen's own story, and they repeatedly illustrate American Methodism's failure to fully integrate and consistently commit to racial equality. Allen was active in St. George's Methodist Episcopal Society in Philadelphia and was at the center of many of the tensions and contradictions of early American Methodism regarding race. Francis Asbury recognized Allen's gifts and grace for ministry, licensing Allen as a deacon in 1799, a year before the General Conference formally permitted African Americans to be licensed as deacons. Yet while his leadership was formally recognized, there were also some boundaries segregating black leaders, divisions based on race. Um, he was, I'm going to skip around a little bit. I wanted to talk about Mother Bethel. There's also another leader named Absalom Jones that is mentioned here that I'm going to skip over. Very interesting book. Y'all should buy this book. I'm going to try and get Watson to interview with me soon. But the thing that I wanted to especially point to was eventually Richard Allen, got active in Mount Bethel, and or no, actually, I think it was this other guy, Absalom Jones. It's been a while since I read this, but the section I wanted to talk about was Mount Bethel's relationship with the Methodist Episcopal Church was always complicated. Richard Allen shrewdly used the connection with the denomination for protection and legitimacy, intending to, quote, create an interdependent relationship with white Methodists while maintaining black autonomy, end quote. In 1805, James Smith, a Methodist Episcopal Church elder, he was white, asserted the right to complete control over Bethel. Allen recounted that Smith, quote, waked us up by demanding the keys and books of the church and forbid us from holding any meetings except by order of him, end quote. After seeking legal advice, Allen discovered that the Articles of Incorporation they had signed, which had been drawn up by the Methodist elder Ezekiel Cooper, meant Bethel essentially, quote, belonged to the white conference, end quote, and not the members who had paid for the building. Is this sounding familiar? Allen was further advised that Bethel could revise the Articles of Incorporation by a 2/3 majority vote of Bethel's members. He then called a congregational meeting where new Articles of Incorporation were passed, quote, before the elder knew anything about it, end quote. The result was called the African Supplement. It revised Bethel's Articles of Incorporation, resolving any questions about control over the church so that it was clear the trustees of Bethel Church owned the church and controlled access to it. This is in Philadelphia, by the way, which is a stone's throw from the Baltimore-Washington Conference. So a lot of the same themes in the same area. The African Supplement continued to affirm a connection between Bethel and the Methodist Episcopal Church, anticipating that the elder would continue to preach and administer the sacraments in the church. Yet even this became a matter of contention as the elder only preached 5 times at the church, and the trustees were unwilling to pay the exorbitant salary demanded. So I'm going to skip the next paragraph. This gets to suing for control of the building now. Once white leaders recognized the extent to which black congregants at Bethel refused to submit to white Methodists any longer, they sued for control of the church. So the white conference was suing the black congregation for control of the church building and assets. Refusing to acknowledge the validity of the African Supplement, they also decided to sell the church at public auction on June 22nd, 1815. Can you imagine? That's what I get for laughing. Allen, determined to control the only thing he could control, he retained the church by being the highest bidder at the auction. His ability, this is Richard Allen, he came to the auction, the building got auctioned off. His ability to pay $10,125 for Bethel and the rental lots near it shows his foresight. Allen's biographer described that amount as, quote, a fortune for people of any class or color. Allen used the money to buy back perhaps the most important free black institution in all of America, end quote. So that was an exceptional circumstance, but it shows that this problem that we have been dealing with in the United Methodist Church goes back, actually. A lot of people say, well, how were we to have known that it could go this way? Well, history is a thing. And so it just so happens that we're living in a historically illiterate time where people don't research their roots. And so that means that they can fall for the same tricks that have been used ever since time immemorial, really. But when you're a Methodist and you learn about the trust clause, and almost all clergy do going through seminary, but you don't learn the times that it's gone bad and the harm that it can do, and then how expensive it can be to for a church to get its own autonomy. How many churches do you think would have really signed up with the MEC or the UMC or any of these denominations that use the trust clause if they saw how hard it was to get out if things went bad? And the answer is hardly any would do it, really. Hardly any are going to say, oh, the institution will always be the same. It will always be faithful. We can always trust them. That's the inflection point we're at right now, where a lot of people are having to reckon with the reality that institutions change, leadership changes, and that whenever you are vulnerable to them in that way, if you're not regularly given input into that system to keep it pure and functional, then it is going to bite you and it's going to be bad. So remember this lesson, learn your history. If you haven't bought this book yet, it's a really good book. You should learn this history. And if you know Kevin Watson, write him and say, hey, you should interview with Rickman, man. He'd be really good. Actually, he knows I want it. Leave him alone. He doesn't want that. All right. I'm going to just slip away for just a second. Let's see. Where can I forget where my transition is. So I'm not going to have a transition. I'm just going to be quiet for a minute, hit some buttons, and then call Cambron right on screen. And he and I are going to chat about important and interesting things. So be gracious with me. All right, I can hear Cambron, but I can't see him yet. It'll give me just 1 second, and then I'll be all set. All right. There we are. All right, there's Cambron Wright, y'all. Cambron writes at Wright writes at substack.com. Actually, tell me, what is the actual URL, Cambron?
I think it's cambron.substack.com.
Oh, is it really?
I have an
All
unusual
right.
name, so I figured I could get away with that.
Right. And then, so he's written some really good stuff on itinerancy. That's where I first took note of him and engaged him. And he's just a thoughtful global Methodist clergyman in the Mid-South Annual Conference. Tell us the name of your church.
I'm at Asbury Methodist Church, and it's in northern Kentucky. So our church is like 12, 15 minutes from Cincinnati, but we're in Kentucky. So that's kind of where
Okay.
we're at.
And so how long have you been at that church?
I'm in my 5th year there, which is kind of crazy. So I got moved there in 2020, and I'm in year 5. So
That's
it's a
fine. Is it
we
your first appointment?
uh-uh. Before I was in Bowling Green, Kentucky for about 4 years, and so I've been in full-time ministry like 9 years, somewhere around there.
Okay. Okay. So you're older than you look. How old are you?
I'm 33.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm still your elder. I'm 40 years old, so show
Sorry.
proper respect, Cambron. We've talked a good deal. We actually we had some stuff that I wanted to cover this morning around finance, but you and I are actually more passionate about um, other stuff around family ministry in particular. Um, and then, of course, you and I are both clergy. We're both global Methodist clergy. We're both fathers of young children. Remind me, how many? You don't have to say their names, but how many kids do you have, and how old are they?
So I have 3 boys. One is 6, one's 4, and one is 1.5. So
Okay.
we're in the thick of
Okay.
it.
3 boys. I grew up in a 3-boy household. It was awesome. I was so
Really? What are you?
disappointed
Are you
when
the
my
oldest?
first child was a girl, and now we had 2 more girls, and it's just awful. So I'm joking, of course. um, all right. So family ministry. Where do you want to start off? What do you think? You've seen kind of what I put out into the world and what I'm about. What do you think would be helpful for our audience today to be thinking about, considering as they listen to us? What if you could have one contribution to them today? What would you want to add to their lives?
I don't know. I think really for a lot of people that I see in my context, and honestly myself too, is just kind of helping people figure out, I don't know, how to have kids that don't just end up being average American kids. Not to
Mm,
not to disparage her kids or anything, but to say how do you kind of as a parent go against the flow of how our kids are being formed? You know what I mean? Because I feel a lot of parents struggling with that. Like not only with the like devices and phones, I think that's a big part of it, but like I don't know, like what kind of practices? I'm curious, what do you do? Like what practices you do as a parent or family to try to form your kids to be like Christ?
Okay, so remind me where you went to seminary?
So I went to Duke. So I went to UK, went to University of Kentucky, big UK fan, and then I went to Duke for 3 years, and then I came back to Kentucky. So
Okay, so the reason I asked that is because if you went to one of the 13 United Methodist seminaries, you're as familiar as I am with the attempt of mainline Protestantism to fit in with the world. And so
right.
if you were inculcated in this kind of setting, you were not equipped in seminary, or rather, you were equipped in seminary. I'm going to speak for myself, but I'm curious how much this overlaps with you.
Where'd you go to seminary?
People who largely separate from the government schooling system, who homeschool, who are much more hands-on with their kids, they are seen as cultish and weird. And so that's just not really an option. For most Methodists, the question is, how do we keep our kids in the worldly system and yet keep their hearts with Christ?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's Vodi Bakum is one of the major religious leaders. He's Reformed, of course. He says, um, "Don't be surprised when you send your children to Caesar for education and they come home as Romans." And so the notion
Right.
being that maybe the distinctly Christian way of raising our children is detached from the government schooling system. What do you think about that, Mr. Wright?
I don't know. I'm very supportive of people that homeschool. We don't. Private schools, Christian schools, homeschooling. I mean, I think, and obviously, I'm fine with people doing public schools too. But I think if your kids are in public school, like my kids go to public school. I have one in first grade, and I am already starting to see like, it's you have to be very intentional. I think in your own formation at home if you're doing that because because here's what I think about. So like, what the purpose of education, right? Um, when you go to a public school, it's not always exactly clear what the purpose is.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Whereas, as can I when I look at it like philosophically or theologically, the purpose of education is to form people of virtue, right? And in a
Mm-hmm.
Christian education, it would be to form people into the image of Christ, to form young people to be like Christ, and to grow in wisdom and knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you go into a public school system in the West, the purpose is unstated, right? Because really the purpose is to equip. Oh, I think if you really press, sometimes they say like it's to equip children with critical thinking skills so that they can choose their own story, right? So that they want to somehow have a values neutral education system, which is
Mm.
impossible, right?
Right.
So I think as parents, you have to be very, very strong about teaching kids what the purpose of their life is and what the purpose of their education is. So that's kind of I think some of the challenge, and also just I don't know. I think a lot of parents in churches don't feel super well equipped as far as how to disciple their children. You know, because I think education is obviously a big part of that, but like what people are actually doing at home, I don't think people always know what to do.
So I saw a thing the other day. You can tell I'm in favor of homeschooling, but there are
Do
a
you
lot of
homeschool? I
people.
don't know what you guys do. Do you
Yeah,
guys
we
homeschool?
homeschool. We have 5 kids: 8, 6, 4, 2, and 3 months. And yeah, we homeschool. My wife is the lead on that. She works part time at the church. She's the main. We we're like stereotypical people from 70 years ago. I'm the primary one outside of the house. She's the primary one inside of the house. We have different overlapping domains. We have a complementarian marriage, and we're raising our children in the home. So, but the meme I saw was, people are acting like homeschooling is like this new innovative thing, and government school is the default. But the reality is that for the vast majority of human history, adults have educated their own children. It's only very recently, and really since the start of our current educational model comes from Germany, where they were trying to systematically train people to be good workers for the corporate um, industrialized system that was emerging in the West. And so that's the model that we learned from. And then since postmodernity has taken over, then some of that's been co-opted and used for other stuff. But the innovation is public government schooling. And when it comes between both models, it's not altogether clear which provides for human flourishing better. That's not to say there hasn't been any formalized education across time. There have always been masters that take students. Christians, of course, formed higher education and the university system. But even so, when we're talking about how young children in particular are to be raised, the vast majority throughout the world have spent a lot more time with their parents than is
Hmm.
currently the case in America. And parents have uh, concomitantly learned to see themselves as instructors of children. So that's what you're hitting on right now is because most parents are spending a lot less time with their children than pretty much every generation before. They feel like I don't know how to teach these kids anything. And partly what's revealed there is a lot of adults don't know. They've been in the church for forever. They haven't really ever sat down and learned good doctrine. They haven't really sat down and read their Bibles. They haven't